For more on Biden visiting the Middle East and global energy crisis, we're joined in Riyadh. Salman Al-Ansari, founder and president of the Saudi American Public Relations Affairs Committee. And in Tehran, we have Hamed Musawi, who is assistant professor for political science at Tehran University. In Guangzhou, we are joined by Professor Joseph Mahoney from Eastern China Normal University. Last but not least, in Beijing, Yang Xiyu, senior research fellow from China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. This is going to be a big trip. Professor Mahoney, tell me more about what's likely Biden wants to achieve.
He has two clear objectives. Because he's stopping first in Israel, we'll mention that one first. He needs to go there and attract some support from the Israeli state, which will help support or encourage Jewish American support ahead of what are likely to be very difficult midterm elections later this fall, where his party is expected to lose seats in the Congress. Secondly, he clearly wants Saudi Arabia to pump more oil to help try to decrease gasoline prices. This is what's really punching him down politically right now with inflation. Every time people go to the pump, Americans are dependent on their cars. So he's hopeful that this will produce some real change in prices, but at the very least, indicate to the American people that he's actually trying to do something.
The U.S. inflation, as you said, soared to a four-decade high last month, propelled by soaring costs of energy, food, and shelter. The U.S. Consumer Price Index, or CPI, stood at 9.1% in June, a dramatic rise from 8.6% in May. U.S. shares fell also after the announcement. Now, there's a lot of discussions about what the U.S. will do and what this would mean, whether the U.S. economy is already in the middle of a recession. Mr. Al-Ansari, to what extent Saudi Arabia will cooperate, quote unquote, in public with President Biden for his trip, as being illustrated by Professor Mahoney, the goals? To what extent Saudi Arabia also having tremendous issues with Washington?
I think it was quite obvious how hard the decision for Mr. Biden to come to Saudi Arabia. And we also how he made some contradictory statements regarding his visit and the leaders he will meet, etc. Also, he made a precedent by writing an op-ed in Washington Post justifying his visit. I think it's self-evident that President Biden regretted his inexcusable, undiplomatic, unfathomable, and I would call it malevolent statements against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and its leaders. And which, you know, some of these statements was like when he said Saudi Arabia is a pariah, that he promised to make Saudi Arabia a pariah. And now he wants to come to Saudi Arabia. So I think right now he realized that you cannot actually do anything in the Arab and Muslim world, or I would call it the global south of our region, without having Saudi Arabia to be crucially important and close to the United States.
One of the things people have been pointed out is the lack of consistency in the attitudes and policies the current White House and likely the future White House has toward either Saudi Arabia or the region in terms of the significance and importance on the priority list of Washington. So how do you see that from your perspective?
Regarding the inconsistency of Mr. Biden, that was actually shown multiple times. So he's kind of following the Obama doctrine, which is turning foes into friends and turning friends into foes. And 2 years ago in Copenhagen, in the Copenhagen summit, in the global, the climate change summit, he actually promised to punish Saudi Arabia for its fossil fuel production. Like, imagine. And now he's asking for the exact opposite. He's asking the Saudis to pump more oil. So I think the Biden administration has decreased the U.S. credibility to an unprecedented level. And it takes a lot of efforts by the U.S. or for the U.S. to rectify the trajectory of its relationship with its allies. And I think we are not worried about Saudi-US relations. What we are worried about is US-US relations.
Very interesting. Go to you, Professor Musawi. You are based in Iran. Of course, that's also another priority. We see different White Houses dealing with the Iranian nuclear issue with very different attitude. Tell me more about your thoughts of the latest change of attitude from the Biden administration, and how is likely that trip going to be received in your part of the world, particularly your country?
So I think Biden's visit to the region can very significantly impact the sensitive negotiations going on right now between Iran and the United States. If the Americans decide to build a coalition centered around Israel against Iran, then that's going to be seen very negatively in Tehran, and that's going to very badly affect the nuclear negotiations. If, on the other hand, the Americans actually encourage the countries in the region to have a positive view of a nuclear deal, then that could be a positive outcome. President Biden actually made a encouraging statement regarding the nuclear deal yesterday, but I think it's still too soon to decide. Also, there's the issue of Iran-Saudi Arabia relations. Iran and Saudi Arabia are negotiating in regards to a rapprochement between the two countries. And I think the Americans can have a very negative or positive role in this regard. I think instability and conflict is not in the interest of the Americans in the region. So hopefully they will not decide down that path.
How much, is Tehran assessing the capability and also the sustainability of this administration leading up to the midterm election and also leading up to the next presidential election cycle? How do you articulate, on the one hand, there are some positive rhetorics coming already and a trip likely to be made in the name of trying to solve and smooth up the differences, but on the other hand, there has been a history and track record of very different moods, emotions, rhetorics, even huge direct policy changes.
But that's been the main barrier towards reaching a deal between Iran and the United States. I mean, it was the Americans that left the deal under the Trump administration in 2018. And Iran is worried that even if they reach a deal with the Americans might leave the deal again. Iran has been asking for guarantees that the Americans would not leave the deal again, but the Biden administration has rejected such a guarantee even under its own administration. So this has been a major barrier, and this is a very risky issue for Iran. So as you mentioned, there is no consistency in regards to US foreign policy, and this makes it very difficult for countries such as Iran.
China has been developing relations with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, of course, as part of the international community, also Iranian nuclear issue. China also having good relations with Israel as well. And the Middle East has been quite an area, shall I say. Also, Russia has been playing its role over the past few years. So, Mr. Yang, how do you see the complexity our other panelists already clearly illustrated?
Well, it's a very good question and also challenging question for China. China do share some common goals with the United States. For example, we do hope the resumption of the substantive and positive dialogues for resuming the Iranian deal. I believe that's one of the goals for Biden administration. And also, we really need the stability of the oil prices that Saudi Arabia can play a significant role. However, all we hope on this region based on the shared interests among all parties. while U.S. Go on this region based on their strategic accommodation goals. For example, our Saudi Arabian colleagues just now mentioned the article written by Biden issued on the Washington Post. China, the term China mentioned by Biden in this article. So even when Biden think about the region of Middle East, far from China, but also in his mind, he also focus on China, focus on competition between U.S. and China. That really produce negative effects on this region. But in short, we need stabilities on this region. We need stabilities for energy prices. That is China's goal, but based on full cooperation among varied parties, including the United States, China, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, and so on. So we have some of common goals with U.S., but with a different strategic thinking base from the United States.
Mr. Al-Ansari, how do you see Saudi Arabia's, at this moment, strategic thinking? One, on the lines of energy crisis and fossil fuel once again become the most wanted items on people's shopping list. On the other hand, there is, I don't want to deny it, the geopolitics, for example, Russia, United States, Russia, the West, and also China and the US, what the US consider as a strategic competition. So how do you see Saudi Arabia right now is trying to find its space or your space within all of these different trajectories? And of course, things are much more than I just described.
Yeah, believe it or not, I actually see Saudi Arabia to be in a strong position right now. And this has been proven actually by just the fact that Biden is visiting Saudi Arabia tomorrow. I think Saudi Arabia is right now in a position where they are gonna work their best to mediate between conflicting parties. They are not there to take sides when it comes to oil and the issues of high energy prices. I think they are not related to the lack of supply of oil, but rather by the effect of the geopolitical tensions in Europe. And Mohammed Barkindo, who has regrettably passed away a couple of days ago, who is the Secretary General of OPEC, he said that there is no one easy solution for the oil, for the high oil prices. So it is obvious that Saudi Arabia is going to stick with the OPEC Plus agreement, and Saudi Arabia is committed to provide energy to whoever needs it, but at the same time, everything should be coordinated with all the other OPEC members state. I think the Russian-Ukraine issue will eventually end somehow. There should be like a political solution. We know that the Minsk agreement number 1, number 2 have not been applied by both sides, specifically by the NATO members. So we knew that there was a big complexity in this issue, and Saudi Arabia has, I think, has voiced its opinion to its partners around the world. So I don't think Saudi Arabia is in a position to take sides at the moment. Saudi Arabia is there to mediate. Saudi Arabia is there to ensure that there is enough supply of energy, specifically for the reason that Riyadh is considered to be the central bank of energy in the whole world.
Yeah. How Iran is figuring out its space. How much space is Iran going to test during this trip made by President Biden?
The view of Iranian leaders towards the global arena right now is that the Americans are not in a position where they were in, say, like the 1990s or even the 2000s. The Americans are no longer the single global power. It's not a unipolar world anymore. And due to the global competition between the United States as well and countries such as China and Russia, Iran feels that it has room to maneuver. So Iran feels that it's in a better position than it was, say, 20 years ago. And as a result of that, Iran is trying to adjust its foreign policy, and it has become closer towards countries such as China and Russia, and it's trying to adjust its economy in that regards as well.
I see. Out of the very complex analysis our colleagues help us, how do you see China is going to observe this trip? Very briefly from you, sir.
On the nuclear issue, Biden has sent a tougher signal than before on this issue. I think that would be counterproductive. And meanwhile, the oil prices, on one hand, I don't think Saudi Arabia can play a significant structural role to turn this situation of energy prices overall. I don't think Saudi Arabia will completely follow American policy goals, and they have their own independent goal. They have been playing balancing roles on this complex geopolitical game.
Okay.
So in short, different policy goals from different players impede American, that is one of the players, to achieve their two goals on these two subjects.
Professor Mahoney, also final words from you, listening to your colleagues' analysis.
Yeah, just a few things. I think the results of this trip will be a marginal increase in political support for Biden in the U.S. The Washington Post article highlighting China. There are two reasons for this, right? The first is all sins are forgiven by Washington and the American people if what you're really doing is competing against China, because they always present China as the greater evil. But also, he does want to open a new front in competition with China. And the Middle East has been very warm to China over the last many years. And I think he'd certainly like to disrupt that if he could.
Very interesting discussion. We'll see how things goes. And thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us and providing your distinctive perspectives.